Hey guys, and welcome back to Everything DIY. So, the other day when I was driving, I all of a sudden lost boost and upon arriving home removed the intake to discover that my turbo had actually seized. I knew that one day I'd probably have to replace it since this car is pushed pretty hard, so I bought a very lightly used OEM turbocharger for $100. Today we're going to show you how to replace the turbocharger on our Mazda Speed 3, but just an FYI, this guide will absolutely work for those of you looking to swap to a bigger turbo like the Cork Sport Turbo, BNR, S3, S4, because the procedure is pretty much the same.
I know a lot of you are wondering why I didn't just buy a big turbo, so let me explain a little better. We do plan on upgrading to a BNR S3 in the future, but the turbo seizing took us totally by surprise. Upgrading to a big turbo isn't just an install and then everything will work type of deal. A big turbo requires time, new equipment, and most important, a new tune. So yes, a time-consuming ordeal, and quite simply we needed this car running as quickly as possible. Happened to have a spare OEM turbo and knew it would be a fast and reliable fix, so we did it, but don't worry, in the future we will be upgrading to a bigger turbo.
We'll also be going through some of these steps quickly because there's a lot involved in a turbo swap, so let's get started. Let's start by removing the entire intake to get to the turbo, so anything in the way of the intake will need to come off. So let's remove the battery and battery box first. Now that the battery's out, we can remove the battery box. So I'm going to start by removing the two ECU wiring harnesses here. And then the 3 bolts that are holding down the box. Just unfasten those. I find it easier to remove the battery box if I take the MAF housing out first, so I'm going to just do that now. So the wiring harness is blocking us from getting off the intake, so I'm just gonna take off the 2 bolts holding it down here and get it out of the way. Alright, so this wiring harness here is kind of in the way of me getting out the intake and turbo, and it has 6 clips that I'm just gonna unfasten now. Get this guy in here. Okay. This one. At the same time. Okay. And then there's 2 back here. And 1 more. There we go. Alright, now I'm going to get this breather hose out of the way by squeezing this retainer back here. I'm going to loosen the bypass valve hose. Finally get the intake out. We have 2 remaining bolts. One here that I'm going to take off now. And the clamp bolt on the turbo, it looks like that, the same thing. Just get it in there. Now that all the obstructions are out of the way, I can shimmy the intake out. Okay. Oh, pause. Still have the vacuum hose in the back, so I'm just going to pull that up really quick. Alright. Okay. And then, of course, this guy off. And we can get it out. Now we need to get access to the turbocharger studs. So next, we're going to remove the top mount intercooler. We have 4 bolts to remove the shroud. Just do those now. 3 bolts securing the intercooler to the car. Loosen these 2 hose clamps here and down here, right there. Last thing is to loosen and remove this bypass valve line. There we go. Finally, we can take off the intercooler. With the intercooler out of the way, we can start removing the 4 heat shields that are in the way of our turbo studs. The first one you need to remove is this firewall shield, which is secured by these 2 plastic nuts. I'm going to take those off now. Second is the top exhaust manifold shield. We need to remove these 5 bolts securing it in place. I'm just going to start doing that now. Just make sure you're keeping everything together because there's a lot of parts we're taking off and you really don't want to lose any bolts or anything else. Third, the downpipe shield, if you have one. This one's a little more difficult because you have to remove the oxygen sensor. Some of you are going to have a hard time removing the sensor. Before you start wrenching on it, you want to grab a can of PB Blaster and spray the sensor and then let it sit for about an hour. Now with that settled in, you can grab an O2 sensor socket and ratchet and remove the sensor. Now with the oxygen sensor off, I am going to be able to get this heat shield off, and doing that by removing these bolts back here. That's off. Now I'm able to remove the last heat shield, and these bolts back here are kind of hard to get to, but just feel around with your hands and you'll find them. So in order to remove the turbo, we have to first loosen up the downpipe, and we have 5 studs down here that we need to loosen and remove. I'm going to do that now. Start here. Alright, so the downpipe studs are off. Obviously, we've lifted the car already, so we can get started on the underside of the car. Now that the 2 race pipe bolts are removed, we can take off the downpipe mounting bolts also. Okay, so it's really hard to film because there's just not a whole lot of room where we're looking, but once everything is loose on the downpipe, what you want to do is get under the car and just push it up and out of the way of the turbo. Just be careful because there's a gasket. Alright guys, so we wanted to find a way around this, but we're gonna go ahead and drain the coolant so that it doesn't get all over the place when we finally remove the turbo. For those of you who need a coolant change, this is a good time to go ahead and do that. We just changed ours about a month ago, so we're gonna use a clean pan and drain it in there so that we can reuse it. Alright, so to drain the coolant, you just wanna unscrew this bolt in here. Obviously we have our pan in place, but the screw isn't going to screw out. You actually have to kind of pry it out. So you're going to put your flathead in there, that little space for a flathead, and you're just going to start moving it out. There we go. So you're going to notice that it's kind of coming out a little bit slower down there. It's coming out, but just not very fast. We did this on purpose, but what you're going to want to do is slowly loosen this cap here until you start to hear it flow a bit more underneath. Yeah, so just really slowly, don't twist it off. It'll just all come pouring out and get everywhere. All right, everything we needed to do underneath the car is done, but I'm gonna go back up here to just get some more things out of the way so that we can finally unbolt the turbo. The EGR is in the way, so I'm just gonna remove it from the car now. Okay. There's 2 bolts holding this on. Unbolt those now. Just pull it up, careful, there's a gasket on it. Then there's the brake booster heat shield here. It has 3 bolts. Let me get this last one off for you guys. Alright. There we are. Let's remove the boost tube on the turbo. Okay. Also, this bolt at the bottom of the turbo needs to come off. This one right here, if you can see it. Get this, pull this tab off. Alright. Get it out of the way. There we go. Alright, the oil banjo bolt needs to come out. Just be careful when you're taking this one out because there are 2 crush washers in there. So the last thing that's in the way of removing our studs is this heat shield here. We don't have to remove it completely, just loosen the bolts. There's one back here, and I'm just gonna finish taking this other one off here. Next, we're gonna break the turbo studs loose. If you need PB Blaster, use it because these are really tight. Just make sure to use a breaker bar because, like I said, they're really, really, really tight. Alright, the studs are loose, so now we can just remove them. Alright, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this last one you have to take off slowly because once it's off, there's nothing supporting the turbo, so I have Steve here ready to catch it. I'm just gonna start working on this one. Alright, 4. Okay, so yeah, here it is sitting in there all sideways. I know it seems like it's in a really tight spot, but honestly, it will come out. You just have to make sure that you're twisting and maneuvering and whatever else you need to do, but it will come out. I'm going to enlist the help of Steve to help me with this because it's quite heavy and needs a little bit more maneuvering than I am personally capable of on my own. So here we go. Here it is in all its field glory, and then this is our other one that we're going to be replacing it with. So what I'm going to do now is just transfer some lines and heat shields and whatever else over before we actually install it, obviously. Alright, so here's the coolant line that I'm going to be transferring over. So it's just like this. I'm going to put new crush washers on. Alright. And then screw it onto our new one here. Alright, the other coolant line, get more crush washers here, here, more. Alright, now the lower heat shield. That Finally, I'm going to slip this vacuum hose over onto here and it should be ready to go on the car. Okay, like I said, it's about ready to get back in the car now, but before I do that, you want to make sure that you install a couple of studs on each side because once you get it in the car, you just don't want it to be a pain in the ass once you have to seat it. One other thing, you can also install the top gasket to make things a bit easier on yourself. Okay, so just like having taken it out, I am also going to need some help putting it back in, but just do as you did to get it out. Just maneuver it and wedge it in there and you'll manage to get it, trust me. Just seat it in the right place. And just like magic, the turbo is back in the car. So all you need to do from here on out is just bolt everything back in the way you got it out, and in the interest of having a shorter video, we are going to stop here. Don't worry, for those of you who don't remember, we are, after I do my sign off, going to do a kind of a step-by-step process of everything you need to do to get your car bolted back together and in the order that it needs to happen. So don't worry, we're on it. So if you guys like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more from us, subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them below as always, and we'll see you in our next one. Bye!